I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. Now, say my name.
Everyone thinks Walter White became a monster because of cancer. That's the easy answer, the one people tell themselves to sleep at night. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. He didn't become a monster. He finally stopped pretending he wasn't one. Cancer didn't create Heisenberg. It only broke the last barrier, holding Walter White back from revealing who he truly was. For years, Breaking Bad fans pointed to the cancer as the turning point, the moment a good man broke bad. A chemistry teacher, a devoted husband, a responsible father who did everything right until one diagnosis changed everything and turned him into the most dangerous man in Albuquerque. This is the story. Simple, clear, and everyone knows it. But it's not the full truth. Because what nobody talks about is this. Walter White had a chance to survive, a real chance. His former partners at Gray Matter, the people he built something with, the people who became billionaires using his work, offered him everything. Full treatment, full coverage, no strings attached. He looked at that offer and he said,
Fuck you.
A dying man with a pregnant wife, with a son who needs him, refused the one thing that could have saved all of them. So ask yourself, why? Why would a man who claims everything he does is for his family refuse the one thing that could actually save them? Because Walter White was never fighting the cancer. He was fighting something much older, much deeper, and far more dangerous than any disease. He was fighting a ghost, something called Heisenberg. The cancer didn't create the monster. It only opened the door. So the real question was never what the cancer did to Walter White. The real question is, who was Walter White before any of this began? And why was Heisenberg always there, waiting? Before we talk about Heisenberg, we need to go way back, far back, to who Walter White was before all of this started. Walter White wasn't just a high school chemistry teacher. No, he was actually a brilliant scientist. Someone who didn't just study chemistry, he understood it instinctively, like it was second nature to him, natural, effortless. He co-founded Gray Matter Technologies with his close friend Elliot Schwartz, and at that time, it looked like this was going to be his big break, his moment, his future. And there was also Gretchen, a woman he had a personal connection with, who later ended up marrying Elliot. Then something changed, something Walter never really explained. He just walked away. He sold his share of Gray Matter for almost nothing compared to what it would later become, before anyone even realized its true value. And that decision, that single moment, became the turning point of his entire life. Because Gray Matter exploded. It turned into a billion-dollar company. Elliot and Gretchen, they became big names in science and business. Interviews, conferences, global recognition. Their success was everywhere, visible, public, celebrated. But Walter White? He disappeared from that story. Instead, he became a high school teacher at J.P. Wynne High School, teaching chemistry to students who honestly didn't care. And to support his family, he worked a second job at a car wash, a life completely removed from everything he once could have been. On the surface, his life looked stable, a wife, a home, a family. But underneath, something wasn't right. Something was unresolved. Skylar was practical, strong. She carried the weight of the family, keeping everything together. Walter, on the other hand, was different, distant, quiet, emotionally closed off. He was there, physically, but not really there in any other way. Not because there was nothing inside him, but because everything inside him had been buried for years. Frustration, regret, pride, silence. And that silence was dangerous. Walter never exploded. He never broke. He just absorbed everything. every humiliation, every overlooked moment, every reminder of the life he never lived. He wasn't a ticking time bomb. He was worse than that, a slow-burning fuse that had been lit years ago. Then came the cancer, and with it, something changed. Something didn't appear new. It was something that had always been there, waiting. Heisenberg. Because for the first time, Walter White had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Let's be honest for a second. Walter White didn't break bad. That phrase makes it sound like an accident, like he slipped, like one day he woke up and, oops, became a drug lord. No, Walter White made a choice, then another, until the choices stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like who he was. And it all started with a partner that was never really a partner. Jesse Pinkman, former student, current addict, no money, no power, no leverage. Walter didn't go looking for someone to work with. He went looking for someone he could control, and Jesse was perfect. Young enough to manipulate, broken enough to need him, and just desperate enough to say yes. So they found a place to cook. Not a lab, not some secret warehouse, an old battered RV parked out in the desert, a rolling junkyard. But inside that RV, Walter White built the first version of Heisenberg. Because while Jesse saw chaos, Walter saw process, precision, control. The offer wasn't an offer. Cook with me, or I call the DEA. That was it. No negotiation, no conversation. A dying chemistry teacher threatening a kid with prison on day one. Remember, this is the man who said everything he does is for his family. But here's where it gets interesting. Because Jesse wasn't just a business decision. Jesse was the first person Walter White ever truly felt superior to. And for a man who spent 20 years being invisible, that feeling was addictive, before the meth ever was. Then came Crazy 8. Their first cook went wrong fast. Walter ended up with a drug dealer chained in his brother-in-law's basement. And now, he had a problem chemistry couldn't solve. He kept him alive for days, brought him food, talked to him, learned his name. For a moment, a real moment, Walter almost let him go. Almost chose the version of himself that still existed. He made a list, actual pen and paper, reasons to kill, reasons to let him live, like he was deciding whether to buy a new car. And then, he wrapped a bicycle lock around Crazy 8's throat. But killing him wasn't enough, because now there was a body, and a normal man, a guilty man, a human man, panics, falls apart, makes mistakes. Walter White went to work. He used hydrofluoric acid to dissolve Crazy 8 completely, methodically, carefully, precisely. The same brain that once dreamed of changing the world through science, now figuring out exactly how to make a human being disappear without leaving a trace. This was the moment chemistry became something else entirely. It wasn't his passion anymore. It wasn't his identity. It was his weapon, his alibi, his cleanup crew. And he didn't shake while doing it. What happened after is what nobody talks about. Walter didn't collapse, didn't drown in guilt, didn't lose sleep in any way that slowed him down. He processed it, buried it somewhere deep, and kept moving. That's not a desperate man doing what survival demands. That's a man discovering a version of himself he never knew existed and realizing he wasn't as horrified by it as he should have been. But if you want the exact moment Walter White ended and Heisenberg began, it wasn't the basement, it was Tuco's office. Tuco Salamanca had stolen their product and put Jesse in the hospital. The logical response? Walk away, take the loss, stay alive. That's what a man protecting his family does. Walter White walked straight into Tuco's headquarters, looked him in the eye, and introduced himself as Heisenberg. Then he pulled out a bag, told the room it wasn't meth, and detonated fulminated mercury, blowing out every window in the building. Nobody asked him to do that. His family didn't need that moment. Jesse didn't ask for a rescue mission. There was no logical reason for Walter White to walk into that room, except one. He wanted to. He wanted to stand in a room full of dangerous men and watch them flinch. He wanted to know what power actually felt like, in his own hands. And when he walked back to his car, hands shaking, heart pounding, completely alive, Walter White felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years, like he mattered. And that feeling, that exact feeling, was more dangerous than anything he ever cooked in a lab. Blue Sky changed everything. Not because of the money, not because of the distribution, because of what it meant. 99.1% pure, the highest purity ever recorded on the streets of Albuquerque, a formula nobody could replicate, a product that made every other cook in the city look like amateurs. Walter didn't just make meth, he made a signature, a statement, something that said, I was here, I built this, and nobody can take this from me. Because that was always the real wound. Gray matter, the company he helped create, the one that slipped out of his hands. Elliot's face on magazines, Elliot's name in interviews, success, everywhere except his. 20 years of watching someone else get credit for something that started in Walter's mind. Blue Sky was his answer, his masterpiece, the one thing in his life that bore his name, even if the world didn't know it yet. But a product needs a market, and a market means people, and people in this business means violence. Tuco was the first real taste of what this world actually looked like. Unpredictable, explosive, impossible to control. Walter watched Tuco beat one of his own men to death with his bare hands, right in front of him. And Walter just sat there, calm, processing, filing it away, not horrified, interested. That should have been the moment he walked away, the moment the chemistry teacher from Albuquerque looked at what he had gotten himself into and chose his family over his ego. Instead, he made a deal. He partnered with the man who had just committed murder in front of him because Tuco moved product, because Tuco had connections, because Tuco was useful. Walter White was becoming someone who saw people as tools, and he was getting very good at it. Then Tuco disappeared, and with him, the first chapter of Heisenberg closed. What came next was a different game entirely, cleaner, more organized, more dangerous in ways that don't announce themselves. Gus Fring. On the surface, a fast food restaurant owner, respectable, quiet, completely invisible, a man the DEA had been watching for years without ever finding anything to hold against him. Walter recognized something in Gus immediately, because Gus was everything Walter wanted to become, powerful and invisible at the same time, in complete control of his operation, his emotions, his image. Nobody saw Gus coming. Nobody ever saw him at all. Working under Gus should have been the smart play. Legitimate income, professional setup, real distribution network. Everything Walter's operation was missing. But Walter couldn't do it without slowly losing his mind, because working under someone meant being managed, being evaluated, being replaceable. And the moment Walter discovered Gus had a replacement being trained, a brilliant young chemist named Gail Bedecker, something inside him shifted, a gear with no reverse. He didn't negotiate. He didn't confront Gus directly. He did something far more calculated. He manipulated Jesse into killing Gail, an innocent man, a genuinely talented scientist, someone who had done nothing wrong. Murdered, not because he was a threat, not because of survival, but because Walter needed to make himself impossible to replace. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't survival. This was Walter White protecting his position, his status, his ego. The man who started this whole thing saying he was doing it for his family had just gotten an innocent person killed to protect his job title. And the worst part? He didn't lose a single night of sleep over it. By this point, Walter White, the person, was basically a memory. What was walking around in his body was something else. Something that learned how to wear his face, use his voice, and smile at his family while being completely hollow inside. But the mask was starting to slip. Skylar knew. Not everything, but enough. You know that feeling when a familiar room suddenly feels off? That was her life now. This wasn't the man she married, not even close. And the more she pushed, the more Walter stopped hiding it. Because something had always been there, just never said out loud. He didn't want to be saved. He didn't want to stop. He wanted her to accept it, accept him, accept Heisenberg as part of the package. When she refused, she became an obstacle. Not his wife, not the mother of his children, just an obstacle. And Walter White was very good at removing obstacles. Then came Jane. Jesse had finally found something real, something human, something that pulled him away from Walter's orbit, and Walter could feel it. Jane wasn't dangerous because she was violent. She was dangerous because she made Jesse want a different life, a better one. Walter showed up late that night, found them both unconscious, and then Jane started choking. He moved closer. He could have saved her in 3 seconds. He stopped, and he just stood there, watching, completely still. Later, he told himself it was necessary, that she was a threat, that it was logic. But logic doesn't stand in a room and watch someone die without blinking. That night, something ended. Whatever was left of the man who used to take his son to Little League died in that apartment with Jane. And what remained was something else. Cold, precise, empty. A calculator wearing a man's skin. But even that wasn't enough. Not for Heisenberg. Because here's the truth. It was never about the money. Walter already had enough to disappear, enough to protect his family 10 times over. He could have stopped at any point. He didn't. Because stopping meant going back to being invisible. And Walter White would rather burn everything to the ground than disappear again. So he poisoned a child. Brock, a little boy, Jesse's girlfriend's son. Walter calculated it perfectly. Lily of the Valley. Just enough to get sick, not enough to die. And then he used it. He used that sickness to push Jesse into destroying Gus. He poisoned a child and watched Jesse break apart in grief, then used that grief as a weapon. After that, there are no more excuses. No family, no legacy, no good intentions hiding underneath. Just Heisenberg. Pure, undiluted. But what about Hank, the DEA agent, his brother-in-law, the man who had been hunting Heisenberg for years, sitting at family dinners the whole time? And finally, he figured it out, finally saw it. Walter didn't confess, didn't break, didn't feel relief. He threatened him. Tread lightly. 2 words, to his family, to his brother-in-law, to the man who had been in his house for years. 2 words that said everything. And then, Hank died, in the desert, in front of Walter. And Walter just watched. Same stillness, same silence, same way he watched Jane. And in the very end, after everything was gone, the money, the empire, the family, Walter finally said the only honest thing he ever said. I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was alive. Not for his family, not because of cancer, not because he had no choice, but because for the first time in his invisible life, Walter White felt like he existed. And that's the terrifying part. Not the meth, not the deaths, not the empire. The fact that you understood him. That somewhere inside, you recognized it. That feeling of wanting to matter, to be seen, to not be invisible. Something human, something dangerous, something you hope you would never act on, but still understand. He beat everyone. Tuco, Gus, Mike, Hank, every single one of them, gone. Defeated by a chemistry teacher from Albuquerque with nothing but a brain and an ego too big to accept defeat. And in return, he lost everything. His wife, his son, his daughter, his money, his empire, his name. Everything he said he was doing this for, destroyed by his own hands. But here's the thing. Walter White never lost Heisenberg, not once. He died on the floor of a meth lab, alone, shot, finished, and somehow, he died smiling. Because in that final moment, surrounded by the thing he truly loved, the chemistry, the control, the power, he was finally exactly who he always wanted to be. Walter White spent his whole life being invisible, ignored, overlooked, replaced. But Heisenberg, he was never invisible, not for a second. So, was the ending a tragedy? Maybe, but only if you believe Walter White was the victim. Because if you really watch the story carefully, you saw something else. Not a good man becoming evil, but a man becoming himself, completely. And honestly, that's the most unsettling part of the entire story. Not that Walter White became a monster, but that becoming the monster was the only time he ever truly felt alive. That's it for today's video, guys. Like, subscribe, and let me know who I should talk about next. See you in the next one!